Hey guys, this is GamerGal. Welcome to another Pokemon Trading Card Game History video. It's kind of an exciting time for us here because at the time of recording, in October of 2024, this is the most recent standard rotation that we have. It will be another maybe 5, just under months to get the next rotation. And so as far as the regular updates of this go, this is it. This is the last one. So it's pretty cool. It's rotation F on is where we are now as far as the regulation marks go, which means we are rotating all of the E-block cards, and there's a lot of them. So we have battle styles over here. Essentially all of the rapid fusion and single strike cards are going. There's a few fusion strike cards that got printed after this rotation, but they don't really do anything without the rest of their support, so yeah. Chilling Reign goes as well, one of the first sets that was actually like genuinely good to play in the Sword Shield era. I don't know, Sword Shield through Chilling Reign was actually kind of fun, so that was neat. Just being able to actually have a bunch of different interesting archetypes come out of here was very good for us. We got some good videos out of that. Evolving Skies was the next one here, very expensive set. I can't imagine why that would be, you know. Also, just has to be one of the most expensive cards in recent history for the stuff here, which is, I mean, obviously, such an awesome artwork for the stuff there. So, yeah, no, very cool set beyond that, though. There was quite a bit that I was excited for in this one, personally. We have the little Celebrations mini set here as well, which you might not think would be too impactful, given that half the cards aren't even playable. Very good for like retro stuff, but yeah, as it turns out, there were actually quite a few good cards in this set. So there's a few of these we need to talk about too. And then Fusion Strike is the final one here. Not a lot of playables in here, still a bit more than I expected, to be fair. But yeah, the cards in here that were playable obviously were very meta defining. So yeah, like screw this one in particular, right? So that is that. There are promos as well, but honestly, with very few exceptions, the promos are largely reprints at this stage. So you'll maybe see some promos as we go through the stuff here, but the only one I really want to go over is the Mewtwo VUNIon. The VUNIon mechanic as a whole is introduced here, and is all E-block, so they all go away here. But the VUnion's only really Mewtwo, and like one result for Zacian I think was pretty good. I don't even know if we kept that Zacian in the end. I think the Zacian was the V-Star ended up with being the one that we played a bit of. The VUnions as a whole were a 3-prize mechanic. They were not basic Pokemon, but like the Legend Pokemon before them, they were only generically searchable. We didn't even get a card that was like Legend Box for them, you know, search it out for VUnions or whatever, so like that was kind of lame. But if you had all 4 of them in the discard pile, you're able to stitch them all together, put them onto the bench as a hard once per battle, and you could do some crazy stuff with them because they had some rather powerful attacks. At least that was the theory. Mewtwo VUnion was the only one that was actually kind of good. It did prevent effects of the opponent's attacks from working on it, which was kind of nice. So like Frenzied Galgian wouldn't get a one-shot on it. Calamity Storm or whatever would, but you know, details. Yeah, it was pretty strong because it could regen 200 HP per turn, which was good when opponents just weren't doing that much damage in overall terms. The other nice thing was the 16 damage counter spread that Psysplosion could do, and if you got 4 energy on it, 300 damage is pretty strong, so I have heard. Gardevoir was, I think, the most successful user of this, although it did see some play in control builds of its own, like, making, which was fun enough to see, I suppose. But realistically, I didn't like it because it made the deck less consistent. And consistency is king in the TCG, so there you go. We have a surprising number, there's like 20 odd cards here which are still meta relevant at the end of Paradox Rift, which is kind of fun to see. So we've got a bunch of cards to speak on this way round. A good number of trainers and energy are still very good from this era as well. And then a whole bunch of historic stuff, as we always have with these things, right? A lot of these cards either are good or at least were good at some point here. And honestly, some of them still saw like a smattering of play, but most of them were more successful in past formats, so we will speak about them as we go. So, on to the meta-relevant stuff here. Single Strike as a whole had a few pretty good cards, but the main one I want to highlight up here is Umbreon. I think Umbreon actually still saw a little bit of play in Paradox Rift, unlike the other parts of the archetype, but I don't think this card saw as much play as I was expecting, and I definitely didn't play it very much, which surprises me a bit, because Dark Signal, like this gusting on evolution thing, has been incredibly powerful many times in the history of the TCG, even going all the way back to the Umbreon EX that did this thing. It was very powerful then too. And the only reason I didn't play it more is because I didn't have enough of it, right? Because we were drafting at that time. Yeah, no, I think like Luxray GL Level X is probably the most famous example, but even like the Ninetales from the single prize one from Gen 5 did actually see some success with the Darkrai Ninetales deck, and yeah, I mean, gusting on an ability is super duper powerful, so you would think this would have seen more play, but I think the disadvantages are a little bit more apparent this time. It's a 3-prizer, which if it gets gusted up in one shot, then well, you're kind of screwed, right? It's only got 310 HP compared to the 330, 340 that the other VMAXs had, so it was a bit frail on that aspect, and its attack was also just kind of bad. Yeah, Single Strike Energy was solid to boost it, but it really wasn't that impressive, and the major thing that it had going for it was that it could hit Mew VMAX, but unfortunately this ability doesn't necessarily work against that deck, and we will speak about that as we go. I don't know, card is really strong, but it just didn't see quite as much success as I was expecting it to. Galarian Moltres, both the V and the regular, are very powerful. I will not be talking about the Articuno or the Zapdos in this bit, but the Moltres is kind of a good stopgap for them because they all did the same thing. Whenever you benched them from your hand, you could attach up to 2 of their respective type of energy to them. So Moltres attached 2 Darkness Energy, the Zapdos did 2 Fighting, the Articuno did 2 Psychic. The attacks on the other 2 were pretty bad, but the attack on Moltres was actually quite strong. For 2 Darkness and a Colorless, it did 20 plus 50 for each prize card the opponent has taken, so a very good single prize attacker later into the game. This could do one-shot numbers on Dark Weak Pokemon, and even some basic Pokemon V/EX as well, when enough prizes were taken. So that was pretty good. Also, Darkness being an extremely good type at this point in the game. Yeah, very powerful. For a similar reason, the V was also used quite a bit. It was used a lot in toolbox style decks because of that weakness hit. As a hard once per turn, you could set your discard pile for a Darkness Energy and attach it to this Pokemon, so it could get extra energy into play. A lot of decks could play Energy Switch then in order to get more utility out of that, but Aura Burn was also pretty respectable. 190 for 2 Darkness and the Colorless was pretty good. Did do 30 to itself, so it undermined its own tankiness a little bit, but was still a very powerful card nonetheless. So yeah, saw quite a bit of play throughout a bunch of different decks all across its lifespan. Even as late as the Paradox Rift set, it was still used with the Lost Box engine. So yeah, very strong card, and also Roaring Moon played it, so yeah. Dragonite V was mostly a Lost Box card because the 2 water and a colorless, 2 water and a lightning on it. If it was colorless, it would be used elsewhere as well, right? But 2 water and a lightning was a bit too prohibitive for a lot of decks to play, but Lost Box, of course, with Mirage Gate was very strong at doing that. 250 damage with a Choice Belt was enough to KO all of the V-Star Pokemon that got played. There's only one that it doesn't, and that one isn't particularly good. Did see a smattering of play. We'll probably talk about it in the future rotation video. Yeah, Dragon Gale did 250, which was very, very powerful. Also good against stuff like Miraidon too. It does do 20 to each of your own bench Pokemon, which was sometimes a bit of a problem to deal with. Manaphy does not stop your own self-damage after all, but 250 was a really high number to hit, and yeah, this did a lot of work as a result. Mew VMAX definitely didn't see as much play as the Jirachi that came before it, because it only gets item cards, it doesn't get trainers, but it doesn't put itself to sleep, and it also doesn't, it looks like one card deeper than the Jirachi did, so that's kind of cool. The big problem in this, I think, is the 60 HP, because this ended up making the difference in the Lost Box matchup. Because Sableye would just be able to KO 2 of these in no time at all, right? And that's a huge problem. So unlike, say, Comfey with the 70 HP, this thing really doesn't survive as long. But for some decks, especially Gardevoir that was playing the not just Mysterious Strategy, the fact that it's a Psychic type, right? It could get Fog Crystal searched, which was good, and the fact that you could accelerate an energy from the discard to it to pay the retreat cost. Yeah, very, very strong for that deck, and it was a really solid one-off as a result. You could sometimes see this as in a single pricing in multiples, but those decks didn't tend to do very well, unfortunately. Still, cool card to have around. Unlike this thing, what do we even say about the Fusion Strike deck as a whole here, right? I mean, it was a fun enough deck to play until it started getting too toxic with things like Path to the Peak, Lost City, and nowadays Grabber and the Luxray V, because they have to deny Charizard from setting up and all that. It's gross now. Really don't like the thing. Mew VMAX is a free 10 HP free prizer, but it does have 0 retreat on both this and the base form, so really nice there. And for 2 colorless energy, it copies your Fusion Strike Pokemon's attacks from the bench. So yeah, very nasty. The obvious biggest thing with this was the Genesect. This 190 HP 2 prizer lets you draw cards until you have as many cards in your hand as your Fusion Strike Pokemon in play. So if you have a full bench of Fusion Strike Pokemon, each one of the Genesects has this thing as a soft once per turn to draw until you have 6 cards in your hand, which is very, very annoying. Usually it doesn't get that sort of far immediately, but it's like the first one will maybe draw until you have 3 cards in hand, then you get the VIP pass that gives you an extra 2, so your next one draws again another 3 cards, and you just keep chaining them up, and you'll get to the 6 cards before the end of the turn. It's just so irritating. But it also has the attack that Mew uses the most often as well. Technoblast does 210 and it can't attack next turn, but that doesn't matter because the Mew's got 0 retreat, so it just goes to the other Mew and just does it again anyway. So yeah, very stupid. The other attack that was most commonly used was Meloetta. Melodious Echo does 70 for each Fusion Strike energy attached to all of your Pokemon, so being a special energy that caps out at 280, but it's also a single prizer that the deck could just use early on in the game and then focus on Fusion Strike, the Technoblast later on. The energy itself is a very irritating component of this as well, because it's a special energy that provides a rainbow, but it also prevents effects of abilities from working on this Pokemon. So this is why the Umbreon isn't as effective, right? Because if the Mew has got a Fusion Strike energy attached, then you can't gust it up. So they can use like the double turbo one in the active to do Technoblast, and then use the Fusion Strike energy on the bench to protect the one that's actually going to do the most damage in the late game, which is really annoying. The other major component to that was Ellis Sparkle. You choose up to 2 of your Fusion Strike Pokemon, and for each of those, search your deck for a Fusion Strike energy and attach it to that Pokemon. So you get even more out of it here. You can accelerate almost all of your Fusion Strike energy on the first turn of that you get to attack, which is really dumb. And then it's kind of a soft part to it, but Cram-O-Matic is effectively a Fusion Strike card because no other deck could really afford to play this. You discard another item from the hand, flip a coin, if heads, search your deck for any one card, put it into the hand. So not only do you conceal information with that, but also, yeah, you play so many items and you want like if you flip Tails with that, it barely even matters because then your Genesect just gets to draw 2 more cards. So yeah, very stupid. The last major component for it is the Power Tablet, which like Electro... oh god, what was the Electro Power beforehand? There's so many of those cards, it just gets confusing. Yeah, Electro Power was the same thing for Lightning types in Generation 7, where you do 30 more damage with your Fusion Strike Pokemon, because Mew couldn't hit enough damage beforehand, right? It has to be able to reach to like 270 with double turbo, blah 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 blah, you know. Just very irritating stuff. And yeah, the deck was so versatile that it could do a billion different builds and things as well, so... it was just a pain. This card was very annoying to have constantly around in the format. They printed so many soft checks and stuff to this, that, and like hardly any of them actually worked because of the way that the deck was engineered, right? Like, the reason why Dark was such a popular type is because this had a Dark weakness, and therefore it would be able to get knocked out by them. But any Pokemon that they tried to splash in, like Drapion V was great until the deck started playing Path to the Peak, and so you couldn't use that anymore, or Lost City to remove it, right? And then there was like Spiritomb that you could use to shut off abilities of basic Pokemon V, but the Fusion Strike Energy prevented that from working on select Pokemon, so you could still use a couple of Genesects, even though that was like very late in, you know. Just, they gave this deck everything, and I don't understand why. It did not need to be that pushed, but whatever. Strong deck, just very annoying to constantly have as a Spectre in the format. Flaffy did not see immediate success, but was very good with Miraidon in the last like 3 sets of the format here. So, super cool. Dynamona is still just as good as it was in Gen 5, and it was a really freaking good deck then, despite the bench sniping and stuff that was going on. Didn't see success with a Rayquaza that was trying to ape from the old Rayquaza EX sort of stuff, but yeah, Miraidon made excellent use out of this. The only vulnerability this had really was Radiant Greninja, was like the big thing, because Manaphy wasn't really playable in Miraidon. There was just like no space for it and whatnot, and so this was very vulnerable to Moonlight Shuriken just sniping the 2 of them down, and game over, that sort of thing for it, right? But otherwise, super good card. Accelerate Energy, always powerful. Too bad the Arthroses weren't very good, but neither were the Electros. That didn't stop Electric before, so yeah. The Rapid Strike engine as a whole has got a bunch of really cool stuff to it here, and Artillery is the main search piece for them. It is a hard once per turn, but it searches for any Rapid Strike card and puts it into the hand, and there are lots of really good ones to note here. So the obvious thing, and the reason this is still meta relevant, is the Inteleon and Urshifu stuff here. So we'll go over the Inteleon first, because this is probably the more common part that you would see from it now. Double Gunner discards a water from hand and then does 20 damage to 2 of the opponent's bench Pokemon, which is pretty good. VMAX Spiral takes a water and a colorless energy, but that's one attachment for this deck. You can put an energy from the from this Pokemon back into the hand, and then do 70 plus 70 more for doing so. So 140 puts the energy back, and you can snipe 40 damage basically across the board, which is very powerful for the 2 other attackers we have here. The regular Rapid Strike Urshifu is worth noting just because Strafe is a pretty good attack, being able to do a little bit of damage if you go first and then shift it to the bench, preserve the energy, all of the usual fun stuff, force the opponent to boss it up if they want to deal with it. And then the the Rapid Strike like VMAX over here, wanted to call it GMAX, but that's because of the attack name. Gale Thrust is respectable, 150 damage for 1 energy if you shift it from bench to active. This Rapid Strike is all about mobility, so that's going to be very prevalent. And then Rapid Flow for 2 fighting and a colorless, discards all the energy on it, does 120 to 2 of the opponent's Pokemon. So this can synergize, of course, with the damage counter placement here to get some pretty nasty KOs on bench stuff there. The last part that benefits from the damage counter placement is Medicham V, who for 2 colorless energy does a Yoga Loop attack. It cannot be used in consecutive turns, and it only places 2 damage counters on one of the opponent's Pokemon. But if one of the opponent's Pokemon gets KO'd by this, you take a full extra turn. So, very nice. The fact that it could be used for double turbo energy means it's usable outside of Rapid Strike, but the real thing for Rapid Strike is its energy. This provides 2 water or fighting energy in combination at any given time, and is searchable by the artillery, so that's how you power all of these things up. Like the 1 water, 1 colorless is paid by this. The rapid flow takes 1 extra energy, but we have acceleration that we'll speak about as we go to fuel that. And yeah, this card is just like actually insane. Like any time that you get a special energy that provides 2 energy at any given time, it's always going to be something that is worth noting. So yeah, very, very powerful. There's some other cool trainers that they had as well though. Tower of Waters aided the mobility aspect of this. You'll probably notice that like all of these cards have got a 2 energy retreat cost or less, and that is because of the Tower of Waters over here. You get to retreat for free whilst this is out because you pay 2 less to retreat Rapid Strike Pokemon, so that's really good. And then the last like actually impactful Rapid Strike card, at least the one that was useful because it was a Rapid Strike and not just generically good, is Kurina's Focus, which is a supporter card. It's not a particularly strong one, only draw until you have 6 cards in hand, but it's a searchable draw supporter, which is something that basically no other deck has unless you play Luminion, who is much more of a liability than this artillery is. So you would still see, even at the very end of the format, you would see these Rapid Strike boxes play 1 copy of Kurina's Focus, just because it is actually that powerful to be able to search your deck for a supporter card to draw. Very nice. So yeah, bunch of really cool cards for the Rapid Strike deck. They were fun until the end, I would say, and yeah, artillery was one of the big pieces that fueled it. The fact that it was Irida searchable as well ended up just giving the deck even more versatility by the end of things. So yeah, really cool card. Speaking on cool cards, a lot of people thought this deck would die when it lost, especially the non-EX Gardevoir over here. But yeah, Gardevoir persists. It just plays very, very differently to what it did before. And one of these videos, I will be exploring that again, because I do love this deck, I will admit. Curlier is a pretty good one-of that stopped the deck immediately playing the Evolution TM when Paradox Rift came out. Mirage Step searches your deck for up to 3 Curlier, puts them onto the bench for just 1 Psychic Energy, so you're probably losing this Curlier, but you'll have 3 more in play, and they can all evolve up, and any routes that you have then can get rare candied into Gardevoirs and just be really cool. The non-EX Gardevoir was one of the main attackers in the deck, especially by the end of its lifespan, because of the fact that it was a non-rule box Pokemon. Shining Arcana let you look at the top 2 cards of your deck, attach any basic energy you find there to your Pokemon in any way that you like, and then add the others to the hand. So it's another draw 2 when this deck already had Refinement, so you can go Refinement, evolve to the Gardevoir, use Shining Arcana, and you've drawn 4 cards off the same Evo line, right? So really powerful stuff there. But the Brainwave attack was the main actual reason to keep playing this, to be honest. For 3 colorless energy, it did 60 plus 30 for each Psychic Energy attached to this Pokemon. Not basic Psychic Energy, regular Psychic, which means Reversal Energy actually can turn into a plus 60 for, no, not even plus 60, plus 90 for this thing. Fuels it all in one go, does 150 without even using Gardevoir EX, but then you could accelerate like 7 energy to it still, or 6 energy to it still, because it can't auto die, right? And you have a ridiculous amount of damage off of this thing. Very, very powerful, capable of one-shotting even big EXs as well, which is really fun. And this 60 plus 30 actually comes in with the Zacian V as well. Roar of the Sword lets you accelerate a Psychic Energy from deck to one of your Pokemon at the cost of ending your turn. But its Storm Slash attack does exactly the same thing as the Brainwave that we just saw. 60 plus 30 for each Psychic Energy attached to this Pokemon. The difference, of course, is you can't Reversal Energy this, but it does have more HP, and is a basic Pokemon. It's 220 HP, right? So you can accelerate 10 energy to this thing from the discard. That is 360 damage, and that will also one-shot any EX Pokemon that you like. So yeah, the deck had two incredibly powerful attackers which are going away, but we still have some other really good stuff in format that we just have to transition to at this point. But either way, very, very fun deck. I mean, Gardevoir's energy acceleration is just flat out broken. There is no better way of putting it. And yeah, I mean, I obviously really enjoy this sort of deck. So, bit of a shame to see it go, but it just has to adapt instead. Kyogre is a bit of a hit to the Lost Box deck for the most part, because there's a Turbo Lost Box build that was pretty much dedicated to this guy, and one of the reasons why the Dragonite was good too, because this also takes 2 water energy as part of its cost. For 2 water and the colors, this 130 HP Celebrations card discards the top 5 cards of your deck, chooses 2 of the opponent's bench Pokemon, and does 50 damage to each of those 2 Pokemon for each energy that you discarded this way. This was used in combination with Energy Recycler, another card which is disappearing in this rotation, that shuffles up to 5 basic energy from your discard pile into your deck. So you would get to the end of the game, you would basically pare your deck down to nothing, and then shuffle like 5 energy back in. If you could use 2 Recycler, that'd be great. Get like 7 energy back into the deck so you don't deck out next turn. Discard the top 5, it's 5 energy, do 250 damage to 2 of the opponent's Pokemon, which is enough to KO most basic Vs and EXs and stuff on the bench. So if you can take care of the Manaphy, this card just wins the game by taking 4 prizes in one shot. It's kind of amazing actually to see played, but difficult deck to use, but even the younger divisions did a lot of good stuff with this, so yeah, super good card. I want to talk about the Zoroark here because this was like one of those really super cool things that was just never amazing until it actually got like a couple of top 32s. I think it got the top 16 in Paradox Rift as well, like right as it was rotating. This card lets you choose a stage 1 accept Zoroark from your discard pile, put it into play, and basically replace the Zoroark with that Pokemon. You discard the Zoroark, any cards attached to it, and throw the chosen Pokemon into play. Benefit of this is that you don't keep damage counters and stuff like that, but the downside is you don't keep energy either, so your stage 1s had to be like super efficient for this to work out. And luckily there were a few. I will mostly mention like 1 or 2 of them. They're all down here because again this deck was never like super competitive or anything, but the first ones I do want to mention are the Flapple and the Appleton because they were like the most prevalent ones here. These have a single energy attack that does a lot of damage based on what the opponent has in play. Acidic Mucus does 50 for each of the opponent's abilities in play, and the Thick Mucus was 70 for each special energy the opponent had in play. So these had very select matchups that they were very good in. The Appleton, for example, was very good in Lugia matchups, and it was a toolbox deck, right? You would search out you would like dump the best attacker for the matchup into the discard pile, and then each Zoroark was able to play itself out and just like replace it with the attacker every time. It gets KO'd, it goes to the discard pile, and then the next Zoroark can transform into it and use it from there. Most of the decks it would run with had to play like a really heavy double turbo line, so you really had to consider 1 or 2 colorless energy as the main thing. My favorite one to play it with is not rotating at the moment. It is the Hisuian Arcanine that for 0 energy did only 10 damage, but it did 150 more if you didn't have any cards in your hand. So it was basically the Grand Ball again, and it did it for 0 energy, so it didn't even have to play energy to do it. And the Zoroark was just extra copies of that Arcanine that you could use at any given time, so very fun stuff. Lastly, from the meta Pokemon here, Crabominable V is really only noted for its Trigger Avalanche attack here, because honestly Destroyer Punch is just a bit too high-rolly, a bit too difficult to get going. Trigger Avalanche just discards the top 2 cards of the opponent's deck. This is a control thing to finish off the game, especially against other control decks as they try and go infinite at the end of the game, and it does get replaced by Chi-Yu, but Chi-Yu has 30 less HP than this, so it is still a noteworthy loss nonetheless. If you could somehow put damage counters down in like a Bat's Caliber deck or something, Destroyer Punch could get a very quick one-shot on even something with like 2 damage counters. 90 plus 60 for each damage counter the opponent has on them is absurd. This is very much like the Tyranitar, the Mega Tyranitar from Gen 6, but it's a basic, it takes less energy, and it still wasn't playable. Unfortunate, you know. On to the rest of the trainer cards here. Battle VIP Pass is one that I am very happy to see go. We do get a replacement for this for evolving decks, but that's fine by me. You can only use it during your first turn, which is the reason I hate this card so much, because you basically have to play 4 of it, and then it's just a brick for the rest of the game, which is dumb. You search your deck for up to 2 basic Pokemon, put them onto the bench, then shuffle the deck. If you don't find it turn 1, then it's just dead, and this is a lot of your basic search, right? You tend to play this over Nest Ball, so it's just gross and annoying, and I hate it. So yeah, not much really to say. This gets any basic Pokemon, so it can also get Squawkabilly, it could get Miraidon, so I suppose you could do stuff with it that way, but it gets just like everything that you want. In particular, it gets you Genesect and Mew, and that was the whole like, blah, whatever. Cross Switcher is a really fun card. You have to play 2 of these at the same time, and you gust up one of the opponent's bench Pokemon, and also switch your active with one of your bench. So it's like Guzma from Gen 7, but you have to play 2 items of the same name at the same time. Pretty balanced card. Irida decks tended to see it a bit. There was a very aggressive form of Bat's Caliber that ended up using this most recently, I think. I can think of anyway. And Pokestop decks tended to play it quite a bit. That was part of the backs package that I had. And yeah, it was pretty cool. So, a fun card to have around. Didn't really benefit from being a Fusion Strike card specifically, but it was still fun. Echoing Horn didn't really benefit from being a Rapid Strike card, but it was very good for control stuff, and just in general for combining with Boss. Being able to put a basic Pokemon from the opponent's discard onto their bench meant that you could pick up like a Frail Luminion or Rotom, Squawkabilly, that type of thing, and then gust it to the active, take 2 prizes, win the game, right? That was its main use, but it also just gummed up the opponent's board state sometimes. Pretty fun. I'm sad to see Escape Rope go. There's a couple of decks that came out in Paradox Rift that were like exclusively good for that 6-month period, because Escape Rope rotating kind of kills them entirely. I'm surprised we haven't seen another reprint of this, but I guess they just want to give it a bit of a break. Maybe we'll see it in 2025, like at some point. But yeah, forcing the opponent to switch their bench, their active out to the bench, and then you do the same. Your opponent switching first means you can react to what's going on, but often you will have a target in mind, so that part doesn't really matter. Fan of Waves disappearing is probably fine, because this card didn't see that much play. It is a Rapid Strike card, doesn't benefit from the tag, puts a special energy from one of the opponent's Pokemon to the bottom of their deck. It's fine. Like, the card is respectable enough, but putting it to the bottom of the deck is worse than discarding, because then it can get searched out again. And so, yeah, when Enhanced Hammer gets reprinted in a couple of sets' time, people are going to be much happier with that. So, yeah. Gardevoir took a couple of consistency hits as well as losing the Brainwave, Shiny Arcana stuff. Fog Crystal searches your deck for either a Psychic Energy or a basic Psychic Pokemon, puts it into the hand, and then Level Ball searches for a Pokemon with 90 HP or less. Level Ball wasn't strictly a Gardevoir card, of course. It was in a lot of evolving sort of decks, but it was mostly played in Gardevoir by the end of its lifespan. Real shame. I love this card. Like, maybe it needs to be slightly tweaked at this point the next time it comes. I don't think it ever will be. But, like, maybe it needs a bit of a HP buff at some stage. But, yeah, I don't know. I really love the idea of being able to search for, like, the lower HP stuff. I think as Stage 1s get more HP, though, like evolving Stage 1s, you may need to increase the thing on this the next time it comes out. But that's assuming it comes out again, obviously. Kind of the same with Rescue Carrier. This only really saw play in like a couple of very specific decks, but putting up to 2 Pokemon with 90 HP or less when you discard pile into your hand is a really cool effect. And yeah, the decks that played it definitely took massive advantage of it. It was a really strong card. Supporter-wise, we've got a couple that are left to note here. Avery was really annoying, but often difficult to justify because it was only a draw free. But if you did manage to play it on an opponent that really liked their bench size, discarding them down to 3 is pretty devastating. Because if you can get a knockout on their active at that point too, they've only got 3 Pokemon left in play, which is not always that easy to deal with. Very irritating card. Gardevoir especially both like loved and hated it. So yeah. Clara is also really good. You get to either put up to 2 Pokemon from your discard pile into your hand, put up to 2 basic energy from your discard pile into your hand, or you get to do both. So you can pick up stuff like an energy retrieval would, but you also just immediately get Pokemon back to the hand. This was like the advantage that it had over Ordinary Rod at the time, and Super Rod from Paldea Evolved, right? Is that you just got to add the stuff straight back to hand and use it immediately. You didn't have to search it back out. But it did take up the supporter slot, so it was very well balanced in that aspect. Melanie was a really good acceleration card. This was the one that Rapid Striker Shifu used in the Rapid box to get that colorless cost on it. You attach a water energy from your discard pile to one of your Pokemon V, and if you do, draw 3 cards. I will forever hate that it was only on Pokemon V. I really still don't understand why this had to be restricted that way. There were so many single prize decks that would have benefited from having this extra acceleration available, but no, we have to buff the 2 prize stuff, right, or the 3 prize stuff. I don't know, it's just frustrating, but it was a really good card. It did see a ton of play, so there you go. Peonia, I think, was seen mostly for control stuff at this point. Put up to 3 prize cards in your hand, and then for each one you put there, you have to put another card from your hand face down as a prize card. Noteworthy that you do not shuffle your prizes with this, so you do get to sculpt what prizes you have where, so that's really helpful. And yeah, you get to just, like, if you're a prize sensitive deck, take stuff out of there. We actually don't really have prize manipulation anymore after this card rotates, so it's a shame because that sort of thing is always a fun mechanic to have around. So yeah, Raihan is a really interesting card to note. Like, this card didn't necessarily see the most amount of play immediately, but this was such a benefit for not just single prize decks, surprisingly, but especially single prize decks got a lot out of this one. You accelerate a basic energy from your discard pile to any one of your Pokemon, search your deck for any card, and put it into the hand. However, I mean, there's 2 conditions, right? The search is conditional on the attach, so if you don't have a basic energy in your discard pile, you just can't play this card. But you can also only play the card if one of your Pokemon was KO'd during the opponent's last turn. So that's why single prize decks take the most advantage of it, because they are the ones that will have the most opportunities to activate this sort of effect. But even stuff like Arceus decks were very good at using this card in the end. Because as it turns out, if you can just get it at the right time, like Luminion Search It for example, it doesn't really matter if you ended up losing like 2 prizes to trigger this, right? Computer Search is a really good card, who would have guessed? Finally, 2 stadiums to note here. Path to the Peak is something a lot of people were surprisingly like sad to see go, which stuns me, to be honest. I really don't like the sort of floodgate type thing this is, but whatever. Roblox Pokemon have no abilities. Just straight up. As a stadium card, it's probably more vulnerable than a lot of this type of thing. If this was on an ability of a Pokemon, then it's much more grotesque, and we do see examples of that as we go. But as a stadium, it's at least potentially outable, which is a thing. You just have to play enough stadiums in your deck to do so. But I guess a lot of people are upset to see this one go because of things like the Miraidon or Lugia, or, you know, a lot of stuff that is still very powerful. Gardevoir would be another one that is like still very strong in the format, and most of them always rely on like multi-prize or abilities and stuff like that. But I don't know, I am just like anti-floodgate. as a thing, so yeah. If you're gonna have to floodgate, I think you should put significant work into getting it out, and this does not put significant work into getting it out, so yeah. And then Stormy Mountains was like supposed to work for the Flaffy Rayquaza deck when that came in, but honestly, it didn't really end up going too far. But this kind of effect is like disgustingly strong, so I think if Miraidon didn't have other stadium cards it wanted to play more, like Beach Court, or as it turns out, Path to the Peak, I think you would have seen this a lot more, because searching your deck for a basic Lightning or Dragon Pokemon once per turn is gross. Like, this is another way to get to Miraidon immediately, which would then get to your search stuff and do everything you want to do that way. So, like, that preserves your Nest Ball to search for the non-Lightning type component of the deck, like Squawkabilly or Mew, right? So, yeah, very, very strong card. I think it just was released at the wrong time, unfortunately, because the deck that it was intended for didn't work. So there you go. So if you're here for the current meta stuff, that is where we end, I think. There's a couple of these that maybe were playable in some decks, but for the most part, this is all historic stuff at this point. So let's go into that. Unlike the other two styles, Single Strike kind of fell by the wayside in the end, because even Lugia ended up going to a more colorless based build, but Beedrill was a very fun card for the formats that it was good in. It's only really playable because of Single Strike Mustard down here. If this is the last card in your hand, you search your deck for a Single Strike Pokemon, directly put it onto the bench, shuffle your deck and draw 5 cards. So, very similar to the old Archie's Ace in the Hole or Maxie's Hidden Ball Trick. Which, fun fact, the Rapid Strike Mustard was those cards, but Rapid Strike didn't need it, so it didn't really see play, unfortunately. The Beedrill that you cheated into play for a single Grass Energy automatically KO'd the opponent's active Pokemon if they had any special energy attached to them. So, Mist Energy doesn't exist at this point, so for the most part, unless it was, I think, exactly the Water one, I think it was it Wash Water it was called? The Gen 8 Water Energy prevented effects of attacks, so that would stop this, but everything else, nah, you just kind of automatically KO'd them. And in Generation 8, there were so many very, very powerful special energy for different types and stuff as well, that most decks would play at least one type of special energy. And when you consider like Rapid Strike and Single Strike energies were a thing, Fusion Strike energy, like the Fusion Strike deck had to be almost always only special energy. This card actually ended up being very good in the formats it was useful for. I believe Arceus decks were the ones that mostly played it, because they could more easily sculpt the hand using Starbirth in order to get this to work. So, very cool. Flying Pikachu V, for the most part, is just a 190 HP 0 retreat lightning bot. It is resistant to fighting, so that's pretty good against stuff that way, because most lightning types are weak to fighting, right? Fly is an annoying attack you hope to never use, so there you go. But Flying Pikachu VMAX did win Worlds, right, against the Palkia Menace, so there you go. Free 10 HP 0 retreat VMAX Pokemon that for 1 lightning and 2 colors did 160, and then prevented all damage done to this Pokemon by basic Pokemon attacks during the opponent's next turn. So it could wall out some decks. Most of them were V-Star/VMAX decks, so they had natural things that would play around that, but for the few that couldn't, card was a menace, and it hit Palkia for weakness, and it was like efficient at doing so because of the 2 colorless in its cost as well. So even with a double turbo, you could still one-shot Palkia V-Star. So it had its very specific time. Gengar VMAX was mostly an anti-Mew thing. Fear and Panic for 2 Darkness Energy did 60 for each of the opponent's V and GX Pokemon in play. Mew VMAX was basically nothing but, so it would get a one-shot on anything it wanted. And then if that somehow didn't work, Gmax Swallow-Up could do 250 for triple Darkness Energy, so that would KO stuff that wasn't using heavy V and GX stuff. and yeah, it couldn't attack in consecutive turns. It does have a really big retreat cost. But the other thing you gotta note with Single Strike is the Single Strike energy, which it provides a darkness or a fighting energy, but it also increases damage done by 20. So Gengar actually could do up to 310 damage with Swallow Up without paying extra to do the thing. So yeah, really strong card as a result. Blissey V was a very weird deck, but like we've seen this kind of thing attempted before. Generation 4 had one that was very similar, but with a much lower damage output. I didn't like it personally, but I did end up seeing it have a bit of success as we go through. Its ability doesn't matter because you generally play Path to the Peak with this thing. Its Blissful Blast is what you want it for. It's a 250 HP basic, by the way, that for 1 colorless energy does 10, but it does 30 more for each energy attached to it, and after you do damage, you can attach up to 3 energy from your discard to this Pokemon. Fun fact, if you put double turbo on this, it does actually still do damage, because it's energy, not energy cards, so you will still get the acceleration as well. It's only if the opponent is like, I don't know, Goodra, and you don't have any extra energy on, and they've done like the minus 80 on it or something, then you probably can't. Back in the day, this was usable with powerful colorless energy to give it an extra 20 on each of its attachments as well, which was pretty good. And here, like double turbo is pretty good, but there's a lot of colorless stuff that does like effect here. Say V-Guard energy to reduce damage the opponent does, the lucky energy, and then gift energy was the thing. Lucky energy's down here because it's rotating as well. You just get to draw a card if you get damage from the opponent's attack, so that was kind of good. Gift energy, if you got KO'd, is draw until 7. That's still in current format. So yeah, there was a bunch of like special energy with really cool extra effects and things that you could use with this, and it was strong, surprisingly strong. Gyarados V and Gyarados VMAX had their specific time with Arceus. They did win a regional. If it wasn't win, they got like second or something. Yeah, very weird. I guess automatically discarding an energy is kind of nice on the VMAX. 240 damage is also possible, and we did have memory style things at the time. I think memory energy specifically was something we could use as well, where we could use pre-evolution attacks as our own, and the get angry attack is why we care about the regular V, because it did 20 for each damage counter on this Pokemon for 2 water and a colorless. With Arceus accelerating the water stuff out here, if you didn't one-shot the VMAX, which outside of using a lightning Pokemon is rather difficult to do, then they could just revenge hit you for your life savings basically. And yeah, it was relatively good at trading that way, so kind of cool. Jolteon V and VMAX, one of my favourite decks in the Battle Styles format, though it had a humongous weakness to a certain bear, unfortunately. Rapid Strike Urshifu just destroyed this because it's a 300 HP free prizer. Real shame. But yeah, 190 HP on the basic. Both have got a 0 retreat, so really cool there. And like Thunder Spear was, I guess, fine. Put 20 damage on one of the opponent's bench Pokemon most of the time, so that you could synergize with Max Thunder Rumble to do 100 plus 100 to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon that already has damage counters on them. So very similar to the multi-shot lightning from Zapdos CX nowadays, actually. But yeah, it was a bit skewed. It was just 100-100 as a thing. But that just like was so terrorizing against single prize stuff, and even against multi prizes, you could engineer 4 prize, 6 prize turns with this, depending. So it was kind of cool. Just very weak to Urshifu, and if any Brown came out in that matchup, it was just dismal. The reason I'm not mentioning the energy cost too much is because we had ways of reducing that cost down. Elemental Badge made your Vaporeon, Jolteon, or Flareon V Pokemon pay 1 less for their attack cost, so you could essentially use it for just 1 energy, and yeah, that was really helpful. Espeon VMAX saw a little bit of play when paralysis locking was a thing. Arceus decks did tend to, you know, tech this in as a result. Solar Revelation prevents all effects of attacks done from the opponent's Pokemon to all of your Pokemon that have energy attached to them. So auto paralysis stuff from like Articuno and Zekrom came in for a while, and this prevented the paralysis, so that was the main thing there. Leafeon V accelerates a grass energy from your deck to one of your Pokemon and then ends your turn. Very useful effect to have. The VMAX itself was also relatively powerful. Grass Knot for a Grass Colorless does 60 for each Colorless in the opponent's retreat cost. You could use Galar Mine at the time to improve that output by increasing their retreat cost by 2. And Max Leaf was like 170. Like, it wasn't very good against Mew. Was probably the big thing here, because it didn't do that much damage to it, right? Anything that naturally has a 0 retreat is not going to take anything here, but most things have around about a 2 energy retreat cost, which the Galar Mine made a 4 energy retreat cost. So 240 for 2 was pretty respectable on something that could self-accelerate as well at the first turn of the game. So yeah. The Sylveon VMAX was pretty good. The V was actually okay too, like it could search an item out of your deck and then end your turn, so you could have setup for the next turn. But the VMAX was the main thing that we wanted here. It's a Rapid Strike card, the first time we're seeing the tag come up here. And I mean, that sometimes matters because you could use Rapid Strike energy with this as well. And Max Harmony does benefit from the multi-type aspect here, because this is a Psychic type, right? Whereas the other stuff is like fighting, sometimes fire, we'll see one of those in a bit. Water is the main thing. And for any free energy, you do 70 plus 30 for each different type of Pokemon that is on your bench. So yeah, you could use Artillery, get the Rapid Strike energy as well to pay this easier. Melanie could also work with it, and yeah, it was pretty good. It was a Psychic type that wasn't weak to Dark, and you could also use stuff like the Galarian Moltres to get extra energy out as well. It's pretty cool. Galarian Zapdos V was interesting. Unfortunately, Articuno wasn't particularly good, sorry, but Zapdos was nice because of its fighting typing. It did 170 for 1 fighting and triple colorless. Did get to discard a special energy before doing damage, so you could discard the V-Guard energy if you want to. It's pretty good, but it was mostly used because you could reduce the cost of that attack. It costs 1 less for each of the opponent's Pokemon V in play via the ability here. So obviously Path to the Peak shuts that down, kind of unfortunate, but 170 hit for weakness KOs Arceus, and Arceus is absolutely massive, so it was a pretty good card. Houndoom is the energy accelerator for the Single Strike engine. You can, once per turn, search your deck for a Single Strike energy, attach it to a Single Strike Pokemon, put 2 damage counters on the Pokemon that you accelerated to. This obviously gave you a damage boost as well, which was pretty good. Unfortunately, its own attack was terrible, but I guess if you're hitting for weakness, put 2 Single Strike energy on this, it KOs a Mew V. Woo. Yeah, that was about the extent of it, really. Suicune V was kinda cool. This was used mostly with the Ludicolo, who, when you evolved into it from, actually it doesn't even have, no it is. When you evolve from hand during your turn, you can make your basic Pokemon do 100 more damage that turn. This allowed the Suicune's damage output to be absolutely disgusting. I will note that Entei and Raikou did come out after this card, so they are still in format, but now we have Palkia basically as the thing for this. It's 210 HP, 2 retreat cost. Lightning weakness is unfortunate, but you know, Palkia can still see some play, so kind of whatever. It can draw a card once per turn if it's in the active slot, and for a water and a colorless, it does 20 plus 20 for each bench Pokemon in play. So if both players max out their bench, it caps out at 220, which is pretty solid. But the Ludicolo then lets it reach to KO V-Stars and stuff as well, which was very nice. And it only really stopped seeing play because Palkia does 60 plus 20 instead, and can accelerate to itself once per game. So, yeah, kind of got outclassed in the end. But the other two, still very powerful. Raikou is still seeing play to this day. So, yeah. Sorry, Yukari, but that's too loud. We're going to skip that. Anywho, Tyranitar V was really good for the Lugia single strike build. It did 240 damage for 2 darkness and 2 colorless, which could easily get to 280 if you use single strike energies. Does discard the top 4 cards of your own deck, but come on, it's a 230 HP basic Pokemon that only gives up 2 prizes and also can get one shots on V-Stars and stuff like that. That's very respectable for a deck like Lugia. Blaziken VMAX is very interesting. It was like Rapid Strike kind of had this like multi-type box thing going on for a while. We mentioned the Sylveon as one of the reasons for it. Max Blaze let you search, basically attach any energy card from your discard pile to 2 of your benched Rapid Strike Pokemon for any 2 energy, so 1 Rapid Strike energy of its own, and it did 130 damage when doing so. The only problem with this card is that was all it did, right? Because Clutch was an attack, but it didn't work off of Rapid Strike energy. It takes a fire energy, and like it doesn't have a big hit move, so it really was just the toolbox aspect of it. But sometimes that was good enough. I'm not really going to talk about the Zeraora in this one, but Zeraora did have like a combo move where if your Rapid Strike Pokemon did an attack last turn, it did a bunch of damage to the bench as well. So like just the fact that you used an attack that way could be pretty respectable for it. Castform, Rainy Form apparently saw some play because it has 0 retreat. That's it. I never actually saw it, but you know, it is what it is. Its attack is like kind of fun, but you need 8 stadiums in the discard pile to make it worthwhile to use, so no thank you. Rayquaza VMAX did actually see a bit of play with the Arceus Ray deck that Pepper used a while ago with the Armourouge in there. That was kind of neat. If you discarded your hand once per turn, you could draw 3 cards, so it has its own inbuilt like consistency engine a little bit. And for a Fire and a Lightning energy, it does 20 plus 80 for each basic Fire and basic Lightning that you discard from this Pokemon. Unlike the past Rayquaza from the EX one, it does not have to discard all of them. You can discard any number that you want, so that's kind of cool. It is also a Rapid Strike card, but again, Fire and Lightning are not core Rapid Strike types, so it doesn't really benefit from that tag. Empoleon V, on the other hand, was actually one that could benefit from it. This saw very specific play when Lost Box was first out, in like Palkia decks and whatnot. If it's in the active spot, the opponent's basic Pokemon in play do not have abilities except Pokemon with a rule box. So this was there to stop Comfey from doing its thing, and among other things, but it was mostly Comfey. The attack for 1 water and 2 colors did 130, then you move 1 energy from this Pokemon to one of your bench, so if you had Rapid Strike energy you could still move that, would be pretty respectable. So yeah, it did some damage. It could move an energy to another Empo. It had 2 retreats, so with Tower of Waters you could retreat for free and just keep like cycling between them. And if you put 2 of them down, Escape Rope doesn't even stop you, so get wrecked, Lost Box. Kricketune, once per turn, could draw until you have 3 cards in the hand, but if it was in the active spot, you could draw until 4 in hand instead. It's a hard once per turn, so you don't play more than 1 copy of this, but I do remember a couple of decks actually playing it just because the draw is pretty reasonable. Charon was used with Regidrago, I believe, which we'll talk about in just a sec. It could accelerate grass energy as often as you like to one of your non-rule box Pokemon in play. Unfortunately, non-rule box decks by this point basically didn't see play, so this 80 HP dude, like, it was levelable searchable, but it was just a bit too frail, and grass just didn't really have attackers that were good at this time. But the Regidrago took 2 grass and a fire to do 240 damage, 20 less for each damage counter on it, but it's a 130 HP single visor. It's going to get KO'd on the following turn anyway, so we don't really care about that downside. It's mostly just like 240 damage for relatively accessible like acceleration stuff. It's fine. This was more used in the Reggie's deck as a whole though, so yeah. Bronzong had Metal Transfer. This used to be really strong when like Chilling Rain I think was the first sort of bit to come out here, because we had a few good metal attackers and being able to shift energy between them to fully heal them with another card called Cheryl over here was actually really good. Or Cheryl, I guess is the main thing. Cheryl is the old school Pokemon Center, but only for evolution Pokemon. Heal all damage from each of them, and then discard all energy that were on the Pokemon that got healed. So yeah, there was a lot of good VMAX stuff that some of them we'll actually talk about probably. A lot of good VMAX stuff in the metal type that you could transfer energy away from in order to fully heal them. And yeah, Cheryl was insane when it came out, so this was a cool card for sure. Victini VMAX lost a lot of its luster when the original Victini V got rotated because it lost the Spreading Flames attack on the 2-Prizer, but this card was another Cheryl abuser. It was a very powerful deck in its own right, being able to do 220 to the opponent's Pokemon V for 2 energy, and just using Cheryl to heal itself because it was very difficult to one-shot this thing. So if you just used enough Cheryls, then the opponent couldn't really win the game, and it was great. Stoutland was used in the first version of Lugia decks back when they had Powerful Colorless energy for one format, and its Double Dip Fangs, if it KO'd a basic Pokemon, would do take an extra prize card. It took 3 energy and did 40 damage. Should really put Ampy very much into perspective, right? But with Powerful Colorless energy, this could get up to 80 or even 100 damage and KO basically any evolution or support Pokemon that way. So like this KO's Comfey with 2 Powerful Colorless. That was its main thing. Liepard was an Eternatus card, so it was like past rotation, but if you played it from hand to bench, then you could discard a Pokemon tool from any one Pokemon in play. It was a Darkness Pokemon. That was specifically why, because Eternatus could only play Darkness Pokemon, and it wanted a full bench for its Dread End attack. So yeah. Tornadus V and VMAX were one version of the the single strike deck that you could play. Tornadus V did 20 for 1 energy plus 20 more if a stadium was in play. So if that one was a single strike energy, that's 60. KOs a lot of evolving basics. The Tornadus VMAX did 120 for 4 energy, but it doubled that to 240 if a stadium was in play, and then force discarded the stadium. So with enough single strike energy as well, this could get up to like 300 plus damage and go from there. You might think that all of this single strike energy stuff, like putting them all on one Pokemon, is a bad idea, because what if that Pokemon just gets KO'd or something, right? Well, Urn of Vitality was one of the only ways we've had in the past like 3 generations to recover special energy. For good reason too, by the way. Shuffle up to 2 single strike energy from your discard pile into your deck. So you could use this, and you use this in multiples, to recover the energy, which then gets accelerated back out of the deck with Houndoom, or potentially Lugia if you're playing that style of deck. Kyurem I thought was kind of cool. It's a 120 HP dude, it takes 2 water and a metal, that's probably the difficult bit here, but its Extreme Freeze can discard any number of waters across your board and do 60 for each one discarded. So it's very much like Qianpao, but it takes a metal, but it's a single prizer, and so like that can swing matchups for sure. So I mean, I kind of liked it. I think it made the deck a little bit clunkier overall, but not by too much where I was like really upset about using this card. I think it's really neat that we had like a single prize version of Qianpao to play with. Pumpkaboo saw a lot of play for quite a while and then dropped off the face of the earth later on when we lost Quick Ball, I'm pretty sure. When you put this from hand to bench, you can discard a stadium card from in play, and that obviously gets around Path to the Peak because it's not a rule box Pokemon. Unfortunately, when Nest Ball is our basic search and it automatically benches the Pokemon, not so useful to play a thing that has a coming into play power. Yveltal, its Generations card, the Cry of Destruction, allows you to discard up to 3 special energy across your opponent's board. Some double turbo based decks would tech this if they had a bad Lugia matchup, because being able to discard a ton of their energy in play was relatively good. Lugia could just accelerate more, but they have a hard limit as to how many times they can do that, so card was still like respectable. The other Lugia I'm not going to mention too much here, but it was a single strike one that just did flat damage that was okay in Lugia to beat Mew, so yeah. Persimmon was played for quite a while with the Urshifu stuff, I think until Manaphy came out. This let your Rapid Strike Pokemon's attacks do 30 more damage to the opponent's benched V and GX Pokemon in play. You could only apply 1 Throwing Coach at a time, so it didn't stack, but this was a really good one-off to allow Urshifu to suddenly hit 150 to the bench. and then Telescopic Sight at the time was able to do 180, and then that starts to KO Dedenes and Crobats and all of that fun stuff. So cool card, ended up getting Power Crept out. I'm not really sure if I should mention Tapu Koko VMAX too much here, but I know Pepper played it at one point. The free 20 HP free prizer does 180 damage for 2 lightning and a colorless, and if you are behind on prizes, it auto paralyzes the opponent. Cool, I guess, but like, it was probably like the 30th best version of Arceus that you could play. I'm pretty sure it had at least a tiny bit of tournament success though, so there you go. Sobble lets you search for Rapid Strike Pokemon, puts it onto the bench. It is a Rapid Strike Pokemon itself. Like 3 basic Rapid Strikes get searched out, so it could search more of itself out. That was really good for the Inteleon engine to evolve to Drizzile, get your item, trainer cards and stuff out the deck. And then Inteleon on the Rapid Strike side could put 2 damage counters on one of the opponent's Pokemon as a once per turn. Very powerful in the past, lost almost all of its teeth in the past rotation, so yeah, it just ended up not really being useful as a stage 2 by itself, but still cool nonetheless. Greedent VMAX was very funny, specifically with the gloves here. I don't know if all of the tight gloves have been rotated at this point, but most of them I think have. I know Justified Gloves especially has, because that would be the anti-Charizard one. These allowed you to do 30 more damage to the opponent's active Pokemon of a specific type. The Spongy Gloves is the one I'm mentioning here because Greedent was only really good at dealing with enemy Sobble stuff. It does 30 damage for 2 colorless energy, but if you KO an opponent's basic with this, you take 2 more prize cards. So this was sometimes played in very silly decks that were just trying to prey on the fact that most opponents were playing the Inteleon engine, and Sobble with only 60 HP could get KO'd by Spongy Gloves plus this. This was back when tools were also item cards, so you were able to search them out more easily as well. Not a good card, but a very funny one nonetheless. Corviknight is one of the main things that was used with the Bronzong plus the the Cheryl engine. This was back when Metal Saucer was a card. That was previous rotation, right? This allowed you to do quite a lot of damage, to be honest. It's a 0 retreat, free 20 HP VMAX. Hard to KO because it prevented effects of the opponent's abilities done to this thing as well, so you couldn't use Inteleon to chip this down, which was pretty good. And I guess you couldn't gust it up with Umbreon either. Oh no, right? For 2 metal on the colorless, it does 240. Can't use it next turn, but that's fine because it's got 0 retreat and metal transfer and all of that fun stuff. And if you could establish 2 of these and enough energy to attack with it, then you just like retreat to the other one, transfer energy to it, Cheryl so that you full heal it, and then transfer like back over and do all the fun stuff with it that way, right? So very good loop and difficult to knock out once it got started. Eldegoss V, not even the V, Eldegoss V rotated last rotation. Regular Eldegoss was used a little bit with the Cherrim alongside, hard to remember all these names sometimes. It was used with the Cherrim alongside that in like the Regidrago deck, because when you, not even just when you evolve into it, just a soft once per turn, search your deck for up to 2 basic energy, put them into the hand. So this could work with like Energy Recycler, obviously, to get the stuff back if you ran out of retrievals and stuff like that. It searches for any type of basic energy, so you get the fire energy that the Drago needs as well. And then if you can get like 2 of these in place, I think your ideal board is like 2 of these, 1 Cherrim, and any number of Drago that you can. Probably a second Cherrim would be nice, but you know, Manaphy's got to fit in there somewhere, right? And yeah, you would search your deck up for like 4 energy that you keep recycling every turn, accelerate them all with a Cherrim, and jobs are good, and 240 every turn. Stone Journo was a pretty good single prize card for the single strike deck. It allowed you to do 120 damage for 2 fighting and a colorless. Couldn't use that attack in consecutive turns, but that's fine because it's going to get KO'd anyway. Single strike energy puts this at 160 to 180. That's the Arceus weakness killing numbers, so there you go. Lance Pulse could also be like okay though. Fighting colorless do 30 plus 30 if there's a stadium in play. That's like 100 damage if there's if like Tower of Darkness is in play, so pretty good. Dracozolt VMAX is a very stupid card. This also took advantage of all the healing stuff, especially Cheryl. For a single lightning energy, Spark Trap does 60, and if the opponent damages this next turn, they take 120 damage in recoil. So, ouch, to say the least. But yeah, free 30 HP, free prizes, so whatever. But if you could just keep using Cheryl and stuff on this and full heal it every turn, then even if you're not doing that much yourself, the opponent can't effectively damage it without like one-shotting it. And even then they still take recoil, so very silly card. Duraludon, I don't really rate this card that much, but it was played quite a bit, especially with like Arceus Umbreon was the other thing. But it wasn't mandatory for that deck, so I'm putting it down here instead. Its Skyscraper ability prevents all damage done to it by attacks from special energy using Pokemon, so hello anti-Lugia, right? And then G-Max Pulverization takes a fighting and 2 metal energy. Doesn't really benefit from the single strike stuff much, right? It does 220 and it isn't affected by any effects on the opponent's active Pokemon. So yeah, it actually wasn't used in single strike decks because it only has 1 fighting in its cost, but it was pretty disruptive. It did have results. It was never really a good deck in my opinion, but it was always there, so there you go. Dreepy is noteworthy because of Infestation. Some decks actually did play this because it does 10 damage for 1 Psychic, but it prevents the opponent retreating, and if you've seen what Snorlax can do, blocking the opponent from retreating is sometimes all it takes to be like, this game never ends. Combine this with Radiant Alakazam actually, and you can literally stick an opponent's active in for the entire game. It's very silly. The single strike Urshifu did see some play here and there. It was mostly used with Lugia because it could accelerate the G-Max 1 blow in a single go. Free fighting and the colorless does 270, so with enough single strike energy you do one shot with this, which is the thing. You have to discard all the energy, which is just, yeah, so hard to keep doing, unfortunately. But its attack and damage isn't affected by any effects on the opponent's active Pokemon. So this really emphasizes the single strike stuff of like damage modding and just killing everything, right? It does 330 if you put free single strike energy on it, but then you've got to be able to reload that every time as well, and that is just super hard to do. With Houndoom you need 3 of them in play, and you also need to be like healing this guy because you're doing 60 damage to yourself every time. But if you play this in Lugia, then the 2 Archeops can just do it in one go. So yeah, I don't know, it's fun. Regieleki, it's going to be a bit of a blow when the Reggie's deck actually comes back to playability, because this is the better one of the 2 Elekis that you could play. Terra Spark for 2 lightning and the colorless does 120, discards all the lightning from this Pokemon, but it also does 40 to 2 of the opponent's bench Pokemon. So wasn't quite enough by itself to KO Palkia, but you could use Choice Belt, sorry, to get the damage up, so that was kind of neat. And unlike the other one, it can hit the active Pokemon, so it actually hits for weakness, which is really good. Yeah, no, strong card, does a lot of damage. It's just very hard to keep charging the whole time through, but that was what the Reggie's deck was best at doing. So yeah, I don't know, I liked it, so there you go. Shadow Rider Calyrex V, you could have maybe put this up in the top bit, because there was like one deck that played this still. Astral Barrage for free Colorless Energy. It was like the Gardevoir Bennett deck that played this. For free Colorless Energy, chooses 2 of the opponent's Pokemon, puts 5 damage counters on each of them. So there was that. I think Shadow Mist was also used mostly in that deck because it was like a disruption thing, being able to prevent the opponent from playing special energies or stadiums in the next turn was pretty good, because that deck was designed to item lock, so it was just like do that first turn, stop them from playing special energy stuff, and then prevent items to turn after. The VMAX is actually replaced now by Xatu, which is hilarious, but yeah, it attaches a Psychic Energy from hand once per turn to one of your bench Psychic Pokemon, draws 2 cards. I think there's a difference actually, because I think Xatu can attach to anything, which is ridiculous, but there you go. Max Geist is also very strong though, and it actually made the Shadow Rider deck like pretty good. The only reason this didn't see like more play is because it's weak to Dark, and when Mew came out and is also weak to Dark, it's like, oh, Darkness Pokemon are really good right now, huh? Triple Colorless Energy, 10 plus 30 for each Psychic Energy attached across your board. Very similar to the Mewtwo that we have, actually, the Terra Mewtwo. So, yeah. Super strong card. It did give up free prizes, obviously, but do not underestimate how much, like, energy acceleration and card draw in the same ability. Don't underestimate how powerful that is. It's insane. Ice Rider VMAX, maybe you could have argued this could have been at the top, but I don't think it saw very much play in the last like 2 formats, so yeah. It's got a couple of good attacks though. 2 Colorless Energy, Rider the High King does 10 plus 30 for each of the opponent's bench Pokemon, and then Max Lance is the actual big hitter here. For 2 Water Energy, discard up to 2 energy from this Pokemon, and it does 120 for each energy discarded. With a 10 damage base, because of course you've got to be able to get to V-Star killing. Even though V-Stars didn't exist at this point, still got to get up there with a Choice Belt. So yeah, this was used quite a bit. It was used with Melanie, obviously, because then 1 attach from hand gets you there. Palkia used it quite a bit as well, because it gave them a very strong attack that was a bit less manipulated by the opponent. And yeah, I don't know, just don't know what else to say. It's just a really good, nasty horsey, I suppose. Strong card. On to the trainer cards that are left here. Boost Shake was used with Galarian Weezing, so it completely fell out of favor after that. Disappeared last rotation, but you just got to evolve one of your Pokemon from the deck, but you have to end your turn after bringing it in. The nice thing about it, though, is that you got to use this at the times when you're normally not allowed to evolve. So I say nice, but that's why it was used with the Weezing, because if you just opened Coughing in the active plus this, you just got to put Weezing into the active spot on your first turn going first, and the opponent never has abilities, and they probably just lose that game because it's dumb and stupid. Adventurous Discovery was used exactly in some Arceus decks. Search your deck for up to 3 Pokemon V, put them into the hand. I think the Surging Sparks is going to give us a card like this for EXs, which is kind of interesting, but I don't know if it's going to see play. But this one actually did, because it turns out like Arceus Duraludon, I'm pretty sure, was, yeah, because it only played like Vs and VMAXs and stuff, so, you know, it searches for any of the family. It's pretty good. I think this was one of the ways that you could search out VUNIONs if you wanted to as well, but I'm pretty sure no deck actually used it for that. But you could. It's pretty funny. Bruno was used in single price decks from time to time. Shuffle your hand and draw 4 cards, but if any of your Pokemon were KO'd during the opponent's last turn, draw 7 instead. If this was a Rapid Strike card, I think it would have seen a bit more play, but as a single strike card, there's no like search for it. There was a Versus Seeker style card for single strike that you could maybe use it with, but single strike stuff didn't really want to do single prize only anyway, so yeah. Copycat is finally rotating again. This shuffles your hand into your deck and draws a card for each card in the opponent's hand. Never really seen that much play in the modern formats. I do remember there was a time when this saw play, but I think it was in like Generation 4 or something, when hand sizes could get absolutely ludicrous. Here, not so much, so yeah. But it's fun. It's always a fun card to see what she looks like in all of the different stuff, right? Maybe we'll see a Gen 9 one at some point where we see her in Penny's outfit or something, I don't know. Peony was very intriguing. There are a couple of Miraidon builds that actually played this, and I think you could play it in a quote-unquote modern Miraidon deck, but I think the disadvantage is just that you don't really need something like this. Avery kind of does the job better. You discard your entire hand and then search your deck for up to 2 trainer cards, put them into the hand. This could be really good with Mew, to be fair, because like you play the 2 trainers and then you get to draw 3 cards with Mew afterwards. Very nice stuff, but I think it's just a little bit outdated, probably, is the thing for it. But it has been really good in a couple of particular decks. Most notably, my Zoroark Arcanine deck was a really fun one to play this, so yeah. Zinnia's Resolve was niche useful. Discard 2 cards from your hand, draw a card for each of the opponent's Pokemon in play. Discard 2, draw 6 is really strong if you can, if the opponent has a full bench, but the fact that it's reliant on the opponent makes it very situational, so not really super useful. Okay if you could search it though. Crystal Cave was really good for the Goodra deck, so that's a bit of a problem point for him. It lets you heal 30 damage from each of your Metal and Dragon Pokemon once per turn, so I mean, if the opponent's playing dragons as well, sucks to be you, I suppose. But yeah, like Archaludon, not Archaludon, but not even there yet, Duraludon VMAX and Goodra were the two decks that would often play this, because they were very hard to knock out, so there you go. Tyranius mentioned a couple of times here. This lets you discard a single strike card from your hand during your turn and draw 2. Ironically, the best deck that I played this in was the Rotom V-Star deck, because there were, one thing I'm not showing here is there was a ton of single and rapid strike tool cards that came out that did like their TMs basically, and none of them were very good, but they were tagged. And so if you discarded single strike tools, you could still get the draw off of this, and Rotom effectively banished tools from your discard pile, right? Sent them to the lost zone and did more damage for each one that you sent. So like, you were already wanting to play tool cards, this gave you a stadium that was a draw engine for that deck, which was very funny. Full face guard, speaking of tools, if you don't have an ability on your Pokemon, you take 20 less damage from attacks. These sorts of tools do see some play from time to time. Remember Hard Charm, for example, was really good, Eviolite was really good, but I think the difference is that like most Pokemon have got abilities at the moment, and the ones that don't, 20 damage is not really going to save you from a lot of stuff, right? So I think it's just a little bit too low impact now, but sometimes it'll save you in the right situation, I suppose. That's kind of cool. Tool Jammer also goes, if it's attached to the active spot, then the opponent's, like any tool in play on the opponent's active Pokemon, don't have any effects. So this was most notably used to prevent retreating with retreat aids from happening, but it also stops like choice belts. Ironically, would also stop the full face guard from before, so like there's a few things it could disrupt, and if you didn't really have any tools that you wanted to play, sometimes it was best just to play something like this. We see Jamming Tower getting played nowadays, for example, so, you know, tool disruption, but it's very selective tool disruption, so there you go. And then finally, we do have an extra single and rapid strike energy to speak on here. These do provide rainbow, so they could, you know, spiral energy could be used to pay for clutch on the Blaziken from above, for example. And they have like one extra additive to them. They prevent paralysis in the single strike situation and poison on the Single Strike prevents poison, Rapid Strike prevents paralysis. I have no idea why Single Strike prevents poison, like that doesn't come up ever, but whatever. It's, paralysis prevention was actually something that could be noteworthy, again because of the Articuno, like Zekrom auto lock stuff, or that Tapu Koko that we saw before, so like that might come up, but realistically, this was only used in specifically the Zero Aura box decks, because this was a searchable rainbow that could be used for that deck, and like Blaziken could accelerate it out of the discard pile to the Zero Aura and allow you to pay for its one lightning and its cost as well. But yeah, the impact one never saw play, I don't think. And that is basically it. A ton of stuff to mention here. These just keep getting longer and longer as we go on, but to be fair, like, you would expect a lot of cards to be playable at some point, and be very disappointed if they weren't. So yeah, no, lots of cool stuff to mention with it here. And like I said, it's the final rotation video for the main part of the series. Maybe when the next rotation happens, if we're still incrementally like doing stuff for the series, we'll go over it again. But for now, that is that. Thank you very much for listening, and until next time, take care everyone.